Hi, American Johnson, non-compete, welcome. Today we're talking about disability. I think this is a really important topic and it doesn't get talked about enough on the left at all. And I think that a lot more people deal with disability than we are led to believe by the society that surrounds us. I'm going to be talking today a little bit about the social model of disability because I think wrapping your head around that is an important step forward for grappling issues dealing with disability and ableism. Basically, what we in the United States of America and presumably most of Europe and most of the rest of the world are kind of conditioned to accept is called the medical model of disability. The medical model of disability basically states that if you have a health condition that leads to disability, you cannot have full access to society. That is part of the nature of your health condition. And it basically normalizes the idea that disabled people aren't able to fully live their lives and engage with society and participate in society, and basically are not even valued by society because of these health conditions. The social model of disability states that society itself is what limits disabled people from having fuller, richer, more productive, and happier lives. By nature of exclusion, prejudice, discrimination, and an attitude that simply states that people who have disabilities are not qualified to fully participate in society. So I am not an expert on disability activism. I have been involved in disability activism for longer than I've been a leftist, much longer. Going all the way back to high school, I've participated in buddy walks and fundraisers for disability and that sort of thing. I have a cousin who has Down syndrome who, we were really close when I was growing up, and that taught me a lot about dealing with severe disabilities. I have a lot of friends who are in wheelchairs. I have a lot of friends who have other forms of severe disabilities. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you today about my disability, because I don't have what you might consider a severe disability. And I'll talk about some of the expressions of my disabilities later on. But the fact that my disabilities are not particularly severe compared to a lot of the people that I know in my life, but also the fact that I can mask and hide and conceal my disability are reasons that until very recently I have been very hesitant to consider myself disabled and certainly to talk openly in public about my disability. And I think that's something that we really need to address as a society because, like I said earlier in the video at the beginning, a lot more people have disability issues than we realize. And I think a large reason that we don't realize that is because so many people are forced by society to hide our disabilities and to conceal them and to wear that mask every day. And I think if more of us came forward and were open about the issues we have with disability, we would suddenly start to realize that lots and lots and lots and lots of people, perhaps even the majority, maybe even the vast majority of us, have some kind of disability issue or another. My disabilities manifest in a few different ways. Number one, I have a major energy problem, an energy deficiency. These issues first started to manifest when I was maybe in my mid-20s, 25, 26 years old. I was working really hard at the time, kind of a workaholic, and so I just kind of attributed it to the fact that I was like working harder, I was getting a little bit older, maybe that had something to do with it, but there was something going on and it got worse and worse over time pretty rapidly. I used to have like infinite energy. Like when I was in college, I would often like work for 6 hours, go to class for 6 hours, write something for 2 or 3 hours, and then go get drunk, and then turn around and start the next cycle over the next day, which today, is unimaginable for me. In my late 20s, I started to develop this. It started out as just like, getting a little tired a little bit more earlier every day, and it got worse and worse, and then ended up developing into full-blown like brain fog, and I was really like having a hard time getting out of bed at all. I wanted to spend all of my time in bed. This is tied to a few different things. Number one is I have a thyroid condition. And the thyroid really affects your energy levels in a lot of ways. I had a hard time getting diagnosed with my thyroid condition for a long time. For one thing, a lot of my doctors in the USA flat out told me that because I have a male genitalia, a penis, that I couldn't have a thyroid condition. That's what doctors told me. It's a woman's disease. And these were like medical doctors who said this. When I went to Vietnam finally, I was able to get tested and that was a process too, because I have a kind of an unusual thyroid condition. But long story short, it took years to get this diagnosis. That's something people with disabilities deal with a lot. During this whole time that I was trying to get a diagnosis for my thyroid condition, I was being told all sorts of things. I was being told that it's some kind of psychological problem. I had to go to a psychiatrist and talk to them, and then they prescribed me like Adderall and some other things because I do have ADHD as well. They prescribed me, like antidepressants. I do have depression, and that, didn't help with the energy issues. Although, the feeling of wanting to stay in bed because of depression is much different than the feeling of having to stay in bed because you don't have the energy to get out of bed. So I can tell you from experience that, the problems associated with my depression were very different from the problems associated with my thyroid condition. And I could definitely viscerally feel the difference. And once I finally got sorted out with my diagnosis and got the thyroid medicine, it helped a lot. It really did. And, this was after years of like exercising a lot, focusing on my diet, because this is what the doctors were telling me. They were like, you can't have a thyroid condition, so you need to just exercise more, try to get more sleep, try to eat better food. So I spent years with like really working on my diet and exercise, and those things helped a little bit. But I knew there was something, more deeply wrong. So when I finally got that diagnosis, I suffered for a couple of years without even acknowledging that I had these problems. And part of it was because I didn't want to admit that I had a problem. I felt kind of shamed and stigmatized that, I couldn't fix myself and that I was like lazy. I felt like I was lazy. I felt ashamed of that. It was really rough kind of going through that process of accepting it. But then when I finally decided I really needed to get things on track, that helped a lot, So acknowledging that you have issues like this goes a long way in terms of, putting you on the right track to feeling better. Now, for the first couple of years when I was really trying to contend with this, I was in the USA. And it was really difficult because I didn't really have access to healthcare. I didn't have insurance. Sometimes I was having to decide between going to a doctor or getting my groceries, and the groceries usually won out. So fortunately, I ended up moving to Korea and then Vietnam, and that gave me much better access to healthcare, which, was a major privilege for me, and really helped me to get my act together, as it were, in terms of dealing with my health issues. But, I know that a lot of people in the USA don't have that kind of access, especially to mental health care, but also to just going to be able to go and see a doctor without having to worry about their, budget getting completely screwed up. And that doesn't even enter into the fact of people who have to receive disability from the government. And there are a ton of issues surrounding that. People that have that receive disability from the government, they have issues ranging from the fact that they often can't get married because if they get married, they'll lose their disability benefits. They can't work. They have all these different problems. And I'm not the person to talk about this. I will link to people who will talk about this stuff in more detail. But that's all to say that in the grand scheme of things, I was pretty lucky because I had moved to Asia and was able to get access to healthcare that I didn't have in the USA. So certainly healthcare access is an important consideration for dealing with disability. And in my opinion, it enters heavily into the social model of disability because a lot of people are further disabled by way of having a lack of access to healthcare. And if we all had proper access to mental health care and physical health care, a lot of us would become much more able to participate in society. So that's one big part of society that prevents people from living fuller, happier, more fulfilling lives. But when I was working in an office environment, this was really, really, really difficult for me. And I had to spend a lot of energy just hiding the fact that I had these disabilities because I knew with the bosses that I had, the managers that I had, that they wouldn't be accepting of a disability because the office culture in the USA, especially in the places where I was working, it was kind of like competitive and like hyper productivity was the order of the day, basically pushing you to work and work and work harder and harder and harder. And we would have these meetings where they'd be like, everyone needs to work 125% today and blah, 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 blah. And, if I was having a bad day with my energy levels, it was like a real trial to mask that. I would, first of all, consume a lot of caffeine to try to jack myself up and hide the fact that I was actually really having a hard time concentrating and focusing and with the brain fog and everything. And, I was just basically having to put on this facade all the time, which really drained me of energy. So by the time I would get home from the office, I would just collapse, and this was my life for a couple of years. It could be a death knell for your career if they find out that you're having issues with energy in this kind of toxic work environment where not putting out 125% and not being a super high performer basically means that you're, considered worthless by the managers. They want people who they can push as hard as they can and squeeze and wrench as much labor out of as they possibly can. So this was really, really tough for me. There were times in the office when I would have a bout of depression, and it was like really difficult to get out of bed in the morning and go to work with depression. And then I really had to put on a mask. I'm pretty fortunate, I think, because I have like this ability to act and put on this like persona of like a high energy, like business bro kind of facade. I'm pretty good at doing that. And I can, and especially because I've practiced at it for a long time, I can sustain it for pretty long periods of time. But, inside I'm really suffering when I have to do that. And I can feel like the worst about it is the brain fog. And if you've never had brain fog before, it's just like, it's hard to explain, but it's like your head is filled with like soup and all of your thoughts have to like push themselves through this soup into the forefront of your consciousness. It's really hard to explain, but it sucks. I felt even then at the time like I brought a lot to the table as an employee, as a coworker. I felt like I contributed a lot in my office, but there was this constant pressure to do more and do more and do more. And the other thing is, I know myself and my body better than anybody. And so if I was working on, for instance, like a website or some big project, I know how to maximize my productivity and my efficiency. And for me, that involves taking a lot of breaks, especially if I'm having issues with brain fog or something like that. If I'll just take a break and if I'll just go maybe take a nap or something like that, it can recharge my batteries enough to where I can push through and get a lot more output, right? So for me, working more hours doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to be as productive as I possibly can be, right? But the society that we live in and the offices that I worked in didn't have the culture that allowed me to maximize my productivity. And, the thing is, as a worker, as an employee, as a coworker, I do take pride in the work that I output. I want to at least. And, I want to, be a part of the team. I think every human being has that drive, right? But when you have a manager that's saying like watching you like a hawk and you're sitting in your cubicle and they're like checking all the time, looking over your shoulder, see what you're doing all the time. They're logging what websites you're accessing. They're checking to, asking you every time you leave for 5 minutes, they're asking you where you're going, it really robbed me of my productivity and it made it more difficult for me to produce, right? So it was actually even within the capitalist framework of like wanting to maximize the productivity of your employees, for me, being micromanaged and examined like that all the time actually made me much less productive. So again, in terms of the social model of disability, I was being pressured to conform into this cubicle, ticky-tacky kind of, preordained mode of existence of office culture that really didn't fit my brain, my personality, and it actually made me less productive even within the capitalist framework, which I find kind of ironic and also shitty because there are a lot of people who could probably be getting a lot more done if they weren't being so heavily micromanaged. There are a lot of other ways in which my disability affects my life. In my personal life, it can be a real problem. Having ADHD, for instance, means that I have a really hard time with like DMs, direct messages, emails, that sort of thing. I've always had terrible time keeping track of all of my social media and my inboxes. When it comes to the medical model of disability would say that, I'm the problem. And maybe I just shouldn't be in a position where I communicate with a lot of people, like the problem is with me. And that just means, if you can't handle it, you can't have access to it, right? That's like the medical model is just kind of like, building walls and limitations around somebody. But the social model of disability, in a perfect world, in a better world, I think it would be great if we could just normalize the fact that, sometimes people have problems with these kinds of things. This is where things get really, I think, difficult for me to process, because one thing about our society that's weird is, in a way, we're kind of like more accepting of severe disabilities in the sense that I think we attach a lot of pity to severe disabilities, right? So if somebody's in a wheelchair or they have, some kind of a severe disability that's like visible and like very like, you know, obvious, then this kind of like pity, our social response is pity. But that pity doesn't actually help the person in the wheelchair, for one thing. It actually, in a lot of ways, hurts that person because, you know, it kind of dehumanizes them in a way, right? Like I've talked to a lot of different people that have a lot of different degrees of disability, and I don't think any of them want pity, right? They want respect. They want to be treated like another human being, just like anybody else. They want you to like, you know, recognize and understand, you know, the situation with their disabilities, but they don't want that pity. And I don't want pity either. You know, I don't want you to pity me. I'm not making this video so you could like feel sorry for me or whatever. The point is I want you to understand me a little bit better and understand where I'm coming from and my experience of the world, right? That's what I think is important for a lot of people with disabilities in the society. So then the other thing associated with people with severe disability is that we just assume that they can't be productive. And because a person can't be productive to the standard that's set by our society, they therefore, you know, under this kind of capitalistic, exploitative model of society that we have, they become unvalued as human beings, right? So the idea is if you can't produce 150%, then you have no value to society. The value and your worth as a human being is dictated by your output and your productivity, right? And not only that, but it's got to be output and productivity that conforms with this specific model of what productivity is supposed to look like. And often that just means a lot of hours being put into something, right? So yeah, so for me, it's like if I can't go into the office and work an extra 10, 15 hours overtime and not complain about it, then I might as well just be, you know, gone. I might as well not even exist. You know, they don't value me. So, and for a person with like a severe disability, we put them into this situation through a myriad of different systems, including the disability, the government disability benefits program, and then social expectations and the job programs that are available for people with disabilities. We put them into this system, into this box where, you know, they're forced to live their life in a certain way, and they're not accepted. They're not allowed to express their lives or to live their lives by their own terms. And that's true for people with severe disabilities, and it's also true for people like me who have, I guess you could say, more mild or at least less obvious disabilities. And I think that, you know, this is just, it's a major problem, and it causes a lot of misery and suffering for a lot of people. You are valuable no matter how much you output. If you output or produce nothing, you're still valuable. And that's one thing I want us as leftists to really recognize is, you know, the fact that, you know, when we say the working class, when I say the working class, I don't just mean people who work, right? I consider the working class to be every single person who is oppressed by capitalism. It's just kind of a accident of history and of circumstance that we call it the working class, and we put a lot of that emphasis on working. But obviously there are a lot of people who don't work, who can't work, or who might not work as much as, you know, society pressures them to or demands them to, but they're just as valuable. You know, there are plenty of people who have absolutely no output, but they're still just as valuable. And we have to remember that, because the consequences of forgetting the value of human beings who don't have that productive output, who don't work to the expectations of society, to the demands of society, are very grim. Because we already live in a world where eugenics programs exist, and like with COVID-19 have been put into place to where people who have certain disabilities or who have certain conditions or illnesses are literally dying and being neglected and not given treatment that they need. You know, it's become kind of a story again with COVID, but it's been the case for a couple hundred years, you know, for as long as our modern medical system has existed. We've had these eugenics programs. We've had systems that literally discard and destroy human lives because they're not considered productive enough. And it's disgusting. It's something we need to talk about a lot more. I hope to do a full video on eugenics in the future, because it's a concept that we really need to get a handle on and address and fight against. But all this is just to say that, yeah, I have disabilities. You might not have known that. It might not be obvious when you talk to me. I'm sure that a lot of people I worked with in the business world never had any clue that I had disabilities, but that made it worse in a way because I had to hide who I really am. I couldn't, in some ways, that's the worst part of having this kind of disability that I have. You have to hide it. You have to pretend that you're somebody that you're not. There's like a shame attached with me as a person, me as a human being. It's kind of a cliche, I guess. It's like the old, you know, like the teenage, you don't understand me, nobody understands me thing. But that does hurt. It hurts when people don't understand you and don't value you, and you have to pretend to be something that you're not. And for a lot of people out there, disability is something that we have to hide or be ashamed of, or if it's something we can't hide, it ends up defining us in this really toxic way that we don't want. One thing I forgot to mention because of my ADHD, presumably, was the subject of ableism. And I feel like ableism is an aspect of prejudice that is severely under discussed, and we kind of don't appreciate the pervasiveness of ableist language and ableist attitudes in our society. And I just think that's really important to address. I'll probably have to just do a totally different video on ableism because it's such a deep subject. But I will say, you know, there's every possibility that in this video I may have inadvertently expressed some ableist attitudes or language myself. You know, I catch myself doing things and unfortunately don't catch myself doing things that are ableist and saying things that are ableist quite often. So if I've said anything, you know, that's insensitive or inaccurate, please, you know, understand that I'm doing my best here. I've been trying to self-educate for a while, but, you know, it is something that we need to take seriously, and we need to understand that this is an aspect of bigotry that is all too normalized in our society. And the instances of people being just like flagrantly ableist and using ableist slurs on the left is, you know, it's way too high. We need to work on that. You know, I'm not talking about canceling anybody or whatever. I just think that we all need to do our best to do better, and to really don't like it when people use disability as an insult or use ableist slurs to try to, like, you know, attack people. We need to all treat each other like human beings. We need to value every human life. And, you know, I hope that we will continue to strive to be more inclusive and, you know, just more compassionate in the way we deal with each other. So I just wanted to throw that in there. I feel like I would be remiss if I did not. Back to the video part of the video. I'd love to hear what you have to say, especially if you have a disability or mental illness, and especially if you have to hide it or conceal it like I have had to do, or if you feel like society is limiting your fulfillment in life in some way. And, you know, I'd love to hear different ways in which we could change society to make it more accepting and to allow people with disabilities to self-actualize more readily. So please sound off in the comments down below. Take care of each other, stay safe, and solidarity. We'll see you next time. This is NonCompete. That was like a news anchory sound off. I don't usually do that. Hey everybody, I wasn't even going to make a video this week because I was having energy issues, ironically. But, you know, at the last minute I got a little burst of energy and threw this together, so I hope you enjoyed it. I want to thank my Patreon supporters for supporting me on Patreon. You make this entire thing possible. Also, the music you're hearing right now is by The Bread Pill, who is a very awesome comrade who happens to be disabled, but also is an awesome streamer and musician. I will link to his stuff in the description. And finally, I hope that you will consider subscribing to our NonCompete Highlights channel. It's a new channel where we share highlights from our live streams. We've done a lot of interviews and streams over the last couple of years, you know, and the thing that happens is usually after the stream, those things just disappear. But there's just so much good content, especially from the guests we've interviewed. So we're gonna start cutting highlights out of our streams and throwing them up. You know, they'll be shorter little chunks, hopefully around between 10, 15, 20 minutes per video. So I hope you'll subscribe to the NonCompete Highlights channel. I'll put that in the description and in a pinned comment as well. Thank you for watching. Thank you for your support. Be safe out there. We'll see you next time. This is the conclusion of the second conclusion, outro, wrap-up segment. Have a nice day, night, time cycle. So this is your job. Subversion, taking advantage of short-sightedness, taking advantage of apathy. This is how you defeat capitalism. Dr. Gaines is going to tell us exactly how to defeat capitalism now.
Surely all of us can feel gratitude and pride toward American capitalism.
Oh my God.
I got to do something with that sound clip. We got to remix that into like a house song or something.
Its record of improving human welfare is unmatched in all history.
Dr. Clifton L. Gaines Jr. was our instructor.
И для двоих.
Subscribe for more.